This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. I'm not sure, but that's been in my heart and in my lips today. I guess that's what happens if you work at a Catholic university for a couple of decades. But our hearts are full of joy. It's a gorgeous day on campus. We're coming into what I think is the most beautiful season of the year around here, which is the fall season, both in terms of the weather. The mornings are getting cooler and the evenings are crisper. The days are pleasantly sunny and in the 70s. Soon the leaves will be taking turn, and that also means the students are back. It also means that we are in the midst of a football season, which brings with it a great deal of excitement. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and for joining us this afternoon. We're coming off a tough loss against a very good Ohio State team, but we're really excited with a new quarterback and a new head coach. We're really excited to welcome Marshall this weekend for our first home game. We hope you'll be coming out and we'll get a chance to see many of you in person this weekend. But if not, throughout the course of the fall, we'll get a chance to embrace, shake hands, say hello, and be in person together as we do best when the Notre Dame family comes together. There is a lot to rejoice and be thankful for. Today, it is my distinct pleasure to interview somebody who was kind of a childhood hero for me. I remember watching a Steelers game and my mom telling me the story about this amazing Rocky Bleier. Over time, as I came to the university, I've had the privilege of being able to call Rocky friend. I'm not sure he would say the same about me, but I'm going to be bold enough to call him a friend. And as you know, he was a star running back, a wonderful student athlete at Notre Dame. He was a leader of the 1966 National Championship football team, went on to become a four-time Super Bowl champion for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he has a story that is just unbelievable. So please join me in welcoming our own Notre Dame's Rocky Bleier.
Hey, thanks, Lou. It's nice to be with you on this day.
I love your backdrop. We got a lot of Notre Dame going, Pittsburgh going.
That's right.
You know, a lot of your life is right there. So tell us a little bit, Rock. Let's start at the beginning. You grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin, not far from Green Bay, and you grew up in the house that also was the home to your family business. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your parents, your siblings, and what it was like to live over the Bleier's bar.
Well, actually, when you look back at it, and I do, and I think it was a normal life. No one knew any different, and so we grew up in the bar. Mom and Dad got married in 45. I came around in 46. They opened the bar back in 45, I should say, and then and so it was a rooming house basically, with a bar attached, and the owners lived behind it. They had a couple rooms. There was a kitchen, dining room, bar. Upstairs were rooms for sleeping rooms, and for men who worked in the mills and so on. And then also on the property was another building where we had the same rooms and an apartment. Anyway, but that's where we grew up, and that was the neighborhood. It was a block off of the main street in Appleton. It was a half a block from St. Joe's Catholic Church and a block from the school. So that was our lives, and I met obviously I met a lot of great people through that period of time, and grew up with as I said, roomers that lived upstairs. Actually, as the family grew, we moved upstairs into some of the bedrooms. And there was four guys that lived down the hallway, and so they became almost like part of the family until we started remodeled the place. But anyway, it was it was a terrific upbringing, and so I enjoyed it completely.
So did you work in the bar growing up? Were you like a bar back? Would you stack and clean and do all that kind of stuff to help your parents out? And
yeah,
then
so part of the thing back at the bar was that also, unlike today, well, at that time we had bottles beer, so all the bottles would be in a chute that would go down in the basement, and there was a collecting pit down there. So ultimately, I had to go down. That was part of my job as a kid, and get all the bottles and put them back in the cases. So when the beer distributor would return, he would take the empties away and bring new cases of bottled beer back in. So that was part of it. Then as we grew up, and then the restaurant, well, then they opened up. So mom and dad served the food. So Friday night fish fries was a big thing in the Midwest at that time and growing up. And so then they expanded to a Saturday dinner, then to a Wednesday, then to a Sunday. And as you grew up, I then became, I was waiting. So I cleaned I did the dishes in the kitchen, and then I would pick up the dishes off the tables, and set the tables. So that was part of my experience of growing up there in the bar.
that's great. Well, I can imagine that game watches were probably a big deal too back in the day, right? And watching the Wisconsin Badgers probably was a big deal. How did we get you out of Wisconsin back when you were being recruited as a high school star to Notre Dame?
Well, actually, it's quite an interesting story, I think, or it's interesting, at least to me. In Appleton at the time, this is when they had dinner clubs, and they had a dinner club there called Scal's. Now, just for the listeners out there, what was a dinner club? Well, it was like a supper club. What does that mean? That means you wore a suit and a tie, and it was an evening out at a very fine restaurant. So the son was Russ Scal, was a Notre Dame guy, and he had and he was a walk-on football player, and was an avid Notre Dame fan. And so he said to my father and I, he said, we have to go down to a football game. And this was after or during my senior year in high school. And we went to the Wisconsin game at South Bend. And so I played Friday night, got up at like 4:00 in the morning, and then we drove down. It's about a 4.5-hour drive or so. And he wanted to get there early. And so we got there. Huey DeVore was the head coach at the time. So he introduced me to Coach DeVore, and so he said, yes. He said, if you'd love to come here, we'd love to give you a scholarship. Oh, that was all exciting. And so we went to the game. And but that was my introduction to Notre Dame at that time. So Ara Parsegian comes in January, and I don't get a chance to go back until we have our visits in the spring. And so I had gone back at that time, but that was my introduction to Notre Dame through Russ Scal at the time, and so during the recruiting period, and so the best advice I received, in all honesty, was the Notre Dame recruiter, and I can't think of his name at this moment, and he said, listen, you're going to get a lot of scholarship offers from schools, and you're going to take a lot of trips on the weekends. And every school that you go to will roll out the red carpet and show you a very good time. And by the time you have to make that decision of where you want to go to school, it's going to be more difficult. He said, my suggestion is choose 3 schools that you would like to graduate from. Not necessarily play football at, but graduate from, because anything can happen during that period of time where you're in school. You might get injured and so on, but your education becomes so very important. And boom, that made just perfect sense to me, because it wasn't that many schools that I wanted to go to, I didn't necessarily want to go to Minnesota and or Michigan, so I chose 3 schools, University of Wisconsin being one, since that was my home state, Boston College, because of a patron that stopped in Dad's bar, happened to be a graduate, and he said, I think I can get you an interview there, and obviously Notre Dame. And so Notre Dame was the first one I had gone to, and Coach Borsigian was there and showed us around on the weekend, and so there was Tom Regner. Tom Regner played offensive guard. He was a year older than I, but Tom played at Kenosha Catholic school there, and we had competed against one another. And I say this in track and field. Coming from our small school, you did whatever you possibly could, and so in track and field, not only run the relays, but also I put the shot. Tom Regner put the shot. Now, my distance in the shot put, it was like 38, 39 feet, was fine for the conference that I played in. But I go down the states and there's Tom Regner, and Tom puts the shot like 58, 59 feet. And I'm going, oh my goodness gracious. But he's playing at Notre Dame. And so anyway, so then I went to Wisconsin. That was too big for me. I went to Boston College, loved Boston, came back. And here is the point. I did what every good Catholic boy was taught to do, which was what? Well, go to church and get on your knees and pray for guidance and direction, and that you make the right choice. And then, like every good Catholic boy, I did what my mother wanted me to do, and that was to go to Notre Dame. So that's what I tell people.
I love it. We're going to see a clip to that end, I think, a little bit later, which is got you on stage.
Right, you're doing that.
But let me ask you a little bit about what was your undergraduate experience like? It was before we were in that 4-year stay hall system, I believe. So you probably lived in a few different dorms. What did you major in outside of football? What was formative in your 4-year experience at Notre Dame?
Well, the interesting thing, obviously, was just coming to school, coming to Notre Dame, being in the dorm, meeting and getting to know other people from other parts, of the country, and going to class and obviously going to football practice, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but it was getting to know people that become lifelong friends and still are from Keenan Hall. So as I tell people, so freshman dorms was Keenan and Stanford Hall. Mm-hmm. After that, to move was based on your GPA. Okay. So you go, oh my goodness gracious. Anyway, as I run into graduates now who go, oh yeah, I was at ZOM. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Anyway, as I tell people, I said, well, what we did was we got 2 smart people that wanted to be in roommates. And so we split them up so that we had a better chance.
I love it.
So anyway, we went to Dillon. So it was 2 years in Dillon Hall, which was perfect. And of course, another whole experience being over there. And then moved to Zorn my senior year. And that was only because I had the chance and the opportunity to become captain of the football team. And so I
lived in the captain's corner, that lower level turret.
Right. Yeah. Lower level room down there.
That's so right. I remember when I was a freshman back in 1980, they talked about the legendary captain's corner. That's right. And they George Gipp lived in that room all the way through Rocky Bleier and
a lot more famous people than I did.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Well, tell me a little bit about, you played in the game of the century, the 10-10 tie against Michigan State, 1966, the national championship year. Any stories that emerge from that game? Any insights that you've garnered over the years and the importance of that game?
Well, okay, so yeah, so the importance of the game obviously was that, here was the first time, that two ranked teams, number one, number two, depending on the polls, got a chance to play for that mythical national championship. Unlike the playoffs we have today, that did not exist back then. And that, quote, the national champion was voted on by sports writers and then by the coaches after the season to be able to determine. But here it was finally, two teams that were ranked undefeated at the end of the season to be able to solidify the true national champion. And so, so the preparation for that game, the hype of that game, and so we go into the game as it was up in Michigan State. A couple things happened there, unfortunately. Nick Eddy, our All-American running back, who had gotten hurt 2 weeks before, injured his shoulder, but was ready to play in this game. Unfortunately, we took the train up from South Bend, East Lansing, Michigan, and so it was a cold day, snow, sleet coming down, and as we got off the train, Nick unfortunately slipped on the steel steps leaving the train, and tried to get the handhold, but caught his arm and wrenched his shoulder.
Wow.
And so all of a sudden he was not available for the next day's game because of the injury. First quarter of the game, Terry Hanratty, who was our starting quarterback, got hurt. And so he was out of the game. Backup quarterback,
Coley O'Brien?
Coley O'Brien was just diagnosed as a diabetic. Now, that may not seem like much today, but at that moment in time, all those many years ago, no one knew exactly how it was going to affect him or in the game. And so all of a sudden he's in the game and so there was a concern just about his energy, et cetera, et cetera. Our All-American center got hurt in that game. And so we had our injuries. But it was a tough physical game, and ultimately it ended in a tie. We had one game left.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan State was finished. We had one game left, which was we're playing Southern Cal out in California, and we happened to beat them 51-0.
Wow.
So, boom, we were deemed then national champions.
I never thought about that the convincing win against USC is probably what separated you from Michigan State in the final polls. But tell me a little bit about you played for some incredible coaches, right? Two incredible coaches, principally your whole career, and Chuck Knoll and then Era. What was it that you remember about Era that made him such a special fit at Notre Dame and such an incredible coach?
Well, I think the biggest thing I think anybody who played for Era would say the same thing. So what he brought was organization. Mm-hmm. What he brought was an intensity. Mm-hmm. And everything that was done, both on the field and off the field, was done for a reason. There was never anything that had loose ends or wasn't tied down. Even how they operated the office, how they coached the players, the expectations of the players. Now, it's difficult, and you have to put it in perspective from a college perspective compared to a professional
Mhm.
because you have to deal with the players that you have recruited with the best that you can get out of them, and being able to mold them. And so I probably one of the biggest things that in his preparations was that, so you play the game Saturday, just to put in perspective for our viewers. Sunday, we gather just to reflect on Saturday's game, go over the highlights and so on, or what needed to be corrected.
Mhm.
And then he just gives you a little insight, into next week's opponent.
Mhm.
Well, we might be, and this is tongue in cheek, playing the little sisters of the poor the
Mhm.
following week, but all of a sudden the first little bit of knowledge was that, the little sisters of the poor happened to beat another team that happened to lose to this team. So all of a sudden, that was it. So
Yeah.
by the time that Wednesday and Thursday came around, Friday, I don't know whether we could beat the little sisters of the poor. I mean, all of a sudden he had them built up. And so you never went in overconfident. You never went in like you could, run over somebody. And you played on that edge that he created. So I did tell a story of when I was, probably puts in somewhat of a perspective of, right before my senior year, I was going to summer school, and as captain-elect of the team, Coach Parsegian asked me, he said, you need to write a letter welcoming all the players back for the coming fall. And I said, okay. He said, but I'd like to see it before we send it out. And I said, okay, fine. So I wrote the letter, and I was on my way to class, and I thought, okay, fine. I stopped at the office. I was right around noon, and as I walked into the office and into the lobby or vestibule outside of the offices, Coach Parsegian was standing there. Tom Pagna, the backfield coach, a couple of the other assistants, and they were just standing there, kind of BSing, and there's nothing going on. And so I said, so you walk in there, hey, Rock, how you doing? Fine. And they shake your hands. How's everything going? Very good. How can I help you? I said, well, Coach, I wrote the letter to send to the coming players. I'd like to take a look at it. And he said, okay, fine. Talk to Ann and make an appointment, will you? And I go, oh, okay. So I turn to Ann. I go, Ann, when can I see Coach again? Said, well, what about tomorrow at the same time? I go, okay. So a lesson learned. Just don't walk in. You make an appointment.
I love it. I love it. So tell me, Rock, you graduated in 1968. You're taken in the 16th round of the NFL draft. Now we don't, we have half that many rounds, not even.
Right.
By the Pittsburgh Steelers, you're number 417 out of 462 players drafted that year. You're not expected to make the team, number one. And what do you remember about that rookie camp, and how did you overcome these insurmountable odds?
Well, I tell you this, I was just happy to be drafted, at the time. And so, unlike today, where there's only 7 rounds and everybody else signs as a free agent, at that time there was 17 rounds within the draft, and you became a property of. The mentality of a professional team at the time was we like to develop our own people from within and within the draft and so on. So the free agency as we see today did not exist as much as it did as it does today back then. And so, but you were part of the team. Okay, so I came, and looked around to see, who we had there, as running backs, as rookies coming in, and I thought, in all honesty, I could play professional football, and that thought really didn't come into view until that my junior year in 1966, when we had won the national championship, and the competition we played against, because these guys were also going into the NFL, and I thought, wow, we could, we played well against that competition. I thought I could do that as such, and so. And coming to, the interesting thing is that under Coach Parsegian and the things that I learned, and this becomes the important thing, is the fundamentals of the game were stressed. As I said earlier, everything was done for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
There was no haphazardness, so everything. So from freshman year all the way through, you had to learn different, you learned your positions. So I'm going to tell you, the ability to get into a left-handed and right-handed stance may not sound like much, but if you're right-handed, you do everything right-handed. You're down in the right-handed stance, et cetera, et cetera. And so the fact is that if you were lined up to the right of the ball, you had to get into a left-handed stance. And if you're lined up to the left side of the ball, you had to get into a right-handed stance. And it was all for a reason, on how your steps were, your body position, the strength in blocking, the lead steps that you took were all for a purpose. Okay, so you learn that. Fast forward, I'm back in Steelers training camp, rookie season, just the rookies are in camp, and the backfield coach and the flanker coach as well, because we played those positions, said, listen, there's a rule change this year in the NFL, and no more crackback blocks. You now have to get your head and shoulder in front of the thighs of that linebacker if you're going to block them. Before you could cut them, and you didn't have to worry about it. He said, so how many of you, I'm going to ask you a question, how many of you can get into a left-handed stance? I was the only one.
Yeah.
He said, okay, everybody has to get into or learn to get into a left-handed stance. He said, because I don't want you to cheat in. I don't want you to give away the play if you have to block that linebacker. And so, and I say to people today, I said, okay, fine. Cross your arms. Just cross your arms. You cross your arms like this. Okay, fine. You just do it naturally. Now reverse it.
Right.
Okay, so it's a little awkward until you feel comfortable with it, and that was the same thing with the left-handed stance. So
Eric prepared you, right, in many ways, right? Eric prepared you for the fundamentals that kind of separated you from a lot of the other players. Now, in your case, Rock, there's 15 players that are drafted that year. There were 13 before you. Only 5 made the team. And of those 5, you ended up playing more games and more years in the NFL than the other 5 combined together over the course of their careers. So you were set up to overcome insurmountable odds. Then tell me, in your rookie year, Rocky, you, with 2 games left to play, you are drafted into the Vietnam War.
Right.
How did that word come to you? Number one, did you get to finish the last 2 games? Did you finish out the season? Did you have to leave immediately? And, how did that play out?
Well, it was how it played out basically, when very simply was, and I do tell this story, is that, so it was I'm sitting in our locker, in the locker room, and like all locker rooms, and I tell people, like all locker rooms, the players are around the perimeter, around their lockers. In the middle is a laundry basket and a couple tables, and so one of the tables was where all the fan mail would be deposited.
Right.
And as I tell them, I said, it was a place I had never visited from the first day of training camp up through the 10th game of the season of that year. Not when you're the 417th person picked in a draft playing on a losing team. Nobody knows you exist.
Yeah.
My mother never even sent me a letter. Anyway, so the equipment guy go, "Hey, Bleier, there's a letter over here for you." So I get up and I walk over and I get it and I find it in my first piece of fan mail, and I open it up and I open it and it said, "Greetings. We'd like to inform you that you've been inducted into the armed services of your country." Now, obviously, that was the worst fan letter I've ever received in my life at that time. Just to put things into perspective for our viewers out there, this was 1968, the height of the war. A lot of things were taking place. People were drafted and to be able to fight it. So I fell through the cracks. Doesn't make it any difference, and so I left. It was like, so here's the deal. It was, and I have to say this as I open up the letter, is to report to the AFI station to be inducted the next morning.
Wow.
And because by the time I got the letter, it was, they're supposed to give you a week, but it was post dated a week ago. And so by the time I got it, was so
you didn't finish the season then?
No. So I went down the next morning basically and got inducted and boom, went right to basic training.
So take us almost a little more than 9 months later, August 20th, 1969, your life changes forever. Would you feel comfortable sharing with us what happened that day?
Oh, yeah. So we were on patrol. We were in an area called Hep Duck, and very basically what it would take place. It was our area of operation in which we operated, and so our battalion, we had 4 companies. We would rotate 2 in the field, and we had 2 landing zones, LZ West and LZ Siberia, in which we operated from. So it was just a rotation. You'd be in the field for 10 days or so, and then you'd be up on a bunker pulling a security guard for the remaining days, and then you come back and so on. So we happened to be up on LZ Siberia, and the word had come down was that we're now on 24-hour alert. There's activity going within our area of operation, and as a buck private, you didn't get any information at all. And so we said, okay, fine. All of a sudden, one of our sister companies were hit. We were then extracted off of the LZ into the field to get them out of the trouble, basically. So we got to them. There was a firefight that had taken place, and we left that evening to get the rest of the company out. We pulled front and rear security. We carried out what bodies were left behind, and on the way out, we ran into another quick firefight, and so the word was to leave the bodies, and we'll come back and pick them up 2 days later. And so basically, that was our mission. On the way out, our company was moving out, and or our platoon, I should say, was moving out, and we were going to go and get the bodies. So that's what we were doing. Back to the area in which we had left them, and so all of a sudden we're walking out on an open rice paddy, and when our point man saw movement across the berm, and he hollered "gook gook," and shots broke the stillness, and the enemy started to run. He started to chase them, and pulling everybody out in the middle of the rice paddy. And then all of a sudden you could do 50 caliber machine guns started to level the area. Guys were in diving left and right to get out of harm's way. I dove into the rice paddy in front of me. 4 guys were pinned down in front of us. Still, my responsibility was to get some firepower on this machine gun position. I carried an M79 grenade launcher, so that was my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, I rolled over my side and I breached a grenade when I got hit the first time through my left thigh, and dropped back behind some protection, and got enough firepower on the machine gun. Get the 4 guys who were pinned down. And so then we crawled back to our commanding officer where we'd come out of the wooded area. They probed our perimeter and they got close enough when all of a sudden a grenade come flying through the air. I could see it going end over end. And it hit my commanding officer on the back, and it bounced off and rolled between my feet. And before I could get out of the way, it blew up and blew up through both my legs and my foot. And we were in another fight.
You first were shot through the thigh, then the second time it was a grenade that went off by you, right, and hit the same leg.
And both legs actually. So yeah. So and blew up through my right foot, mainly, and up through my right leg. So
at that point, Rock, do you think there's a chance you're not going to make it out of there?
Well, you never think about that. Your reaction is just, what's taking place. So now we're in a firefight. There was one time when, yes. So all of a sudden it was, all of a sudden I thought they were going to overrun us. And then for whatever reason, they pulled back. So whether we had shot or wounded or killed their commanding officer or whatever it was, and they retreated, but that was the case. And so a sister platoon fought its way down, actually, and then dragged us out of there or got us out of there. Later
so
on.
Did you need to be? You're starting to cut up on a little bit, so it's more difficult to hear you at this point. So I'm asking some clarifying questions. Did you need to be dragged out of that rice paddy then?
Yeah. So anyway, so they came and because I couldn't walk because of the damage to my legs, and so they carried me out on a poncho liner, and so then we carried. Okay. So these guys had been up, since the break of day as well, and they'd been in their own firefight, and now they'd come to get us out of there. So 4 guys picked up 4 corners of this poncho liner that I was lying in, and so they started dragging me out through throughout the evening, and until they couldn't drag me any further, as the story goes. And they decided, he said, "Don't worry." I said, "Don't worry. We will we'll send a stretcher back for you." And so, but the interesting thing there, and that was in maybe the heat of the combat, maybe the brotherhood of serving in the military, much like is that all of a sudden a fellow soldier who happened to be a black fellow soldier scooped me up and threw me over his shoulder and started carrying me towards the helicopter. He'd put me down, catch his breath, pick me up again, and continue on until he got me onto that helicopter. And as I tell people today, I'm here because of really a colorblind soldier who saw not that he was black and I was white, but that, that blood was blood, and that we're in the brotherhood of combat and what it was all about. So, so I have some long memories about that.
So Rock, you revisited that site, ESPN, with reporter Tom Rinaldi, right, who happens to be a Notre Dame parent now. He's got a child here who's a first-year student at Notre Dame. He actually brought you back to that rice paddy years later, and we have a clip that we want to show of that.
All right.
You came out, you walked through, and you paused for a second. And quietly, you said to yourself, Jesus Christ. Why?
What did you say there, Rock? How did you answer that question? And what was it like to go back to that same site where you had been so severely injured many years before?
Well, all of a sudden, at that moment of time, it became very emotional for me. I mean, all of a sudden, it was I could feel it from the bottom of my feet up through my whole body, this emotion that had taken place. And I couldn't understand it. At first, there was a part of me that could not understand it because unlike the majority of maybe returning Vietnam veterans during that period of time who had to repress all their feelings because no one ever asked them what their feeling was, they weren't accepted coming back here. People called them baby killers and spat upon them because they identified the soldier with the conflict, and that was Vietnam was an unfavorable conflict. And so that soldier returning repressed all those feelings. Well, I came back to a quote high profile business. I've been a kid trying to make a football team after he'd been shot a couple times. It became a story. And because of that, questions were asked of me, why, how you felt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So through a period of time, those years, I had a chance to talk about that experience and have somewhat of a cleansing where the majority of people didn't. And so when I was back there, all of a sudden out of left field, I mean, really out of left field, maybe gave me the first indication of what traumatic stress syndrome is all about. Because boom, the emotions of 58,000 fellow Americans losing their lives over in Vietnam. For what purpose? What was accomplished in that conflict? The Vietnamese people, they embraced the American soldier. Even though they're still a communist country, but all those emotions just hit me all at once, and so I, broke down and just couldn't control the emotional feeling.
Yeah. So you come back. Nobody really thinks you got a shot. You don't even complete your rookie season. You come back. The Steelers believe in you, and it's a long rehab back from these injuries. You go on to play 10 seasons in the NFL. You have 1,000-yard plus rushing season. You go on to win 4 Super Bowl rings. How do you come back from this, Rock?
Well, first of all, you have to get an opportunity and you have to get a chance. And that was given to me by the Rooney family. And so, however, so Mr. Rooney, and I really believe this, being the person that he is and he was at the time, is that, he gave me an opportunity, so I came back, and whether they felt guilty or whatever the reason was, I came back and they put me on injured reserve that first year, and then another operation on my foot. And I came back the following year, and then went through training camp, and they made the taxi squad, which is now the developmental squad, as they call it. So they bought me 2 years kind of to hang around, 2 years, and he paid me a salary, and but gave me 2 years to heal, 2 years to get bigger, 2 years to come back, and you have to do something with that period of time. And so I came back.
Probably most people didn't think you were going to make it back ever, right? They probably thought this was a charity case. Did you have doubts?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have, I didn't have doubts. I didn't want to go down that alley. I just thought very
Yeah.
positively. I went back and did all the things I needed to do because in my mind, partly was the fact is I never wanted to get to a point in one's life and say, what if I would have worked out more, did this more, whatever it might, and try to erase those as best possibly can, so that if I did not make it, it wasn't because I didn't try, and for whatever reasons, then we deal with that on a later basis. Anyway, I came back and as I said, and I hung around for a couple of years and I got bigger and I got stronger. And so on. Then, so it was 70, 71, 1972. And I say this, so in 72 and 73 and 74, I was the leading ground gainer during the exhibition season. Okay. Now, unlike today, there's only 3 games in the exhibition season. Back then, we had 6 games in the exhibition season. So you got a chance to play more and so on. And the reason that I was a leading ground gainer wasn't because of the fact that I was bigger, better, faster than anybody else. It was the simple fact that I played more in those games than anybody else. Right. And I carried the ball more than anybody else. So given 2 simple statistics, I better be the leading ground gainer during that period of time. And so I tell because then they had to keep me, so they had to keep me. And so that was one of the things. And then ultimately, and this all goes back to Notre Dame, and it all goes back to Notre Dame, and all goes back to the fundamentals of the game, is learning not only one stance, left or right-handed, but how to block and how to run and what to look for. So by 1974, I was bigger, stronger than I had been before. And anyway, the reason I got a chance to start was a question that Chuck Knoll posed to his backfield coach. He said, "You have a weakness in your backfield." He said, "Who is your best blocker?" Mm-hmm. And he said, "Bleier." He said, "Then start him." So I got a chance to start in 1974 after the 5th game of the season and started that whole year and go to the playoffs and then go to the Super Bowl and then play the remaining part of my career in that way. But
Franco Harris, I think they're just retiring Franco's number.
Yes, they are. Yes, I'm very proud of that fact.
Yeah, which is incredible. You guys were such a dynamic duo. But your story is kind of a rise from the ashes, right? The brokenness to go on 10 years, 4 Super Bowls. The success that you had was almost unfathomable after being in that rice paddy and those 2 years of rehabilitation. Notre Dame prepared you football-wise with the fundamentals. Did it contribute to your spirit, to your character formation in any important ways?
Yes. Obviously, it did, and I say that in all honesty. Okay, fine. And let's put this in perspective. Being a cradle Catholic, and having that being part of one's life was so important to me and a part of who I am and a part of what I believe and so on. Things that you could fall back on, whether I was in high school or problems that happen in one's life. And my faith might be personal, but becomes very important of being able to fall back on and maybe have some sense of being. Okay. And ultimately it was the same thing going through this whole process. Mm-hmm. And yes. And so going to the grotto when I had the chance to come back to Notre Dame was important to me. as it as it was during the times I was at Notre Dame. And so, yes, my faith, my belief, my Catholicism was something that was given to me, but it's also something that becomes a part of who you are and a part of who I am. And I'm so grateful for having that being a part of my life.
So, Rocky, tell us a little bit before we close about your family. You have 4 children: Samantha, Audrey, Ellie, and Rosie. And Ellie and Rosie are both adopted from the Ukraine. Now, we're really, really proud of the fact that Ellie graduated from Notre Dame
Right.
not long ago in 2020, and she was actually featured on one of those home football broadcasts and the "What Would You Fight For" ad that talked about her going back to study at the Ukrainian Catholic University, which was her original birthplace. And so tell us a little bit about why you adopted both, Ellie and Rosie, and tell us a little bit about Ellie's journey back to her place of birth.
Well, so I part of what had taken place is is that we wanted to do something and have a family unit that and kind of give back, and so we ran into some people that had adopted some kids, I should say. And so anyway, at that moment in time in our lives, there was a lot of people were going to the Ukraine to be able to adopt. Russian was closed, and so there was all these kids that were there. So my wife and I decided that's what we needed to do, and that's what we wanted to do. And so we went over to the Ukraine and went through the process and got these 2 girls. And so and we got Ellie and Rosie. And so we adopted them from Ukraine and brought them back, named them after our respective mothers. Ellie, being the oldest, was my mother's name, Ellen, and Rosie was my wife's mother's name, Rose. And so and so the interesting thing with Ellie specifically was that she always has affiliation with who she is and what she wanted to be, and Ukraine was part of that. And they both know that they've been adopted. They both know that of their situation. So it wasn't something that we held back from them, because it's a part of who they are. And Ellie embraced that. And when she was at the university, she learned to speak Russian there, because that's what she wanted to do. And so she speaks fluent Russian at this time. And she went back to the Ukraine and to Russia with the university and to study. And so she eventually she got a Fulbright scholarship. And so, which we were very proud of. And so she was going to go back to the Ukraine and Russia to teach. And so, but all of a sudden COVID came in and it was pushed off and was pushed off. And so in the meantime, she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do. And so ultimately she was going to go to law school, but this kind of the unknown of what was taking place. So she went back to Moscow at the turn of this year, in January, and to teach English there. And then all of a sudden, the conflict blew up between Russia and the Ukraine. And so she was in Moscow And she got out right before they closed the immigration, and so she came back home. She is now in New York, and she took a job with the National Human Rights Foundation, in which she loves. And because of her background, because of her ability to speak Russian, she is now somewhat entrenched in that part of the Europe of what is taking place in the human rights action.
Well,
So,
I'm sure you got to be incredibly proud of all
yes,
4 of the kids, but we take a special pride in Ellie, and as a Notre Dame grad, and what she's doing to kind of go back to her roots and to give back on the human rights front for a war and an invasion that that has to hit close to home.
yeah,
You know, for you and the family and the poor folks in the Ukraine. But boy, they are tough. They're tough. They're tough people, and they're a force to be reckoned with themselves. So, Rock, as we close things up here, when you look at your life, you know, it's at early on, it's characterized by this tragic set of events and this rice paddy, and you bounce back with incredible fortitude and the blessed and surrounded by many people who loved you and nurtured you over the way. And at the same time, you come back to this more personal war now in the Ukraine, that, you know, where you've adopted 2 of your daughters from. What are your life lessons? What are some things that are takeaways for you? What parting words of wisdom could you share with our viewers?
you know, I think the biggest thing is, you know, believing in of who you are and what you can accomplish and what you cannot, and having great faith in that you're living that life, because we make a difference. I don't care what you do, where you came from, what your education is, that you can influence, not necessarily influence, but you have an impact on people's lives in both a positive and negative connotation. Right. By what you say, how you act, what you do, you know, and most of us, you know, we're trying to live our lives and get through it and raise your family as best you possibly can. But you also have an impact by other people that you run into that affect you. So, and I think the biggest thing and the biggest lesson is, you know, never to give up, and never to stop doing what you love, and finding an end to it or a reason for it. And so, you know, we do that kind of every day of our lives. And I'm so, you know, grateful for all the experiences that I had, for the opportunities of being at the university and going to Notre Dame, and the people that I've met, not only then, thereafter, is that you do make a difference, and you have to understand that. And so, Lou, I want to thank you for allowing me just to be a part of this.
Well, Rocky, thank you. Thank you for your witness, your testimony to grit, to perseverance, to hope, to giving back to others is an inspiration, I know, to all of us. And we're just so proud to consider you a leader of the Notre Dame family, and our prayers for you and your family going forward. So we always close these sessions with a Hail Mary, and let us offer the prayer to Our Lady today, to all those who have suffered from violence and still are dealing with the after effects of post-traumatic stress disorder from whatever experience of violence that they've had in their lives, but also for the people of the Ukraine in particular right now, who are fighting for their sustenance and for their survival and worrying desperately about their children and loved ones along the way. So together, please join in. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks again, Rock.
Thanks, Lou.
God bless, and go Irish.
Right.